If you would like to earn CPE credit for listening to the show, visit earmarkcpe.com, download the app, take a short quiz, and get your CPE certificate. Now on to the show.
From Datarails, this is FP&A Today.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to FP&A Today. I am your host, Paul Barnhurst, aka the FP&A Guy, and you are listening to FP&A Today. FP&A Today is brought to you by Datarails, financial planning and analysis platform for Excel users. Every week, we welcome a leader from the world of financial planning and analysis and discuss some of the biggest stories and challenges in the world of FP&A. We will provide you with actionable advice about financial planning and analysis. This is going to be your go-to resource for everything FP&A. I am thrilled to welcome today's guests on the show. Today, I have with me Aviv Canaani, who's the VP of Marketing for Datarails, and Christian Wattig, who also works for Datarails. Welcome to the show, Aviv.
Hey, great to be here, Paul.
Welcome, Christian.
Thanks for having me, Paul.
Yeah, no, thank you both for joining me. And Christian, thanks for being the first return guest that we've had.
Thank you.
So just a little bit about them, and then I'll give them an opportunity to introduce themselves with a little more detail. But Aviv is coming to us from Tel Aviv. He earned his MBA from Duke University. He teaches startup marketing at a local university, and he's also led marketing for several startups. Christian comes to us from New York City. He runs a successful FP&A training program called the FP&A Bootcamp, and also works for Datarails. He's worked with customers, does some training stuff as well. And he has over a decade of FP&A experience working in industries, including consumer goods and subscription businesses. So Aviv, maybe you could start by just telling us a little more about yourself and how you ended up where you're at.
Awesome. Sounds good. So actually, not everyone knows that I've actually started in politics. In Israel, I was an advisor to a minister in the Israeli government. I later was an advisor. I was the director of communications to a member of parliament. That's where I really started in all my so-called marketing PR career. But I quickly understood that if I really want to learn, the best about marketing, I need to go to the private sector. So I moved to the States, did my MBA at Duke, which has a great marketing program. During my time there, I interned at Lenovo and IBM, started working for IBM actually as a social media manager in New York. Later got the opportunity to move to Austin, Texas and lead a content marketing team. Moved up the ranks there. And then my final role at IBM, I was a program director at IBM, doing everything that has to do with paid media. And eventually I decided, after having two kids, actually one was born in New York, one in Texas. So maybe there's going to be some kind of future rivalry there. I decided to move back to Israel, to where, all the grandparents are. But I stayed with startups that focus on the North American market. Started with an online marketing company. Later, I was a VP marketing at a startup called Workiz. And about a year or so ago, I joined Datarails. The founder, Eyal Cohen, approached me and said, let's talk. And it's someone, you can't ignore. He already built a unicorn startup called WalkMe. It's already publicly traded. And this is hopefully it's going to be his second unicorn. The moment I started, I just saw how exactly like Eyal said, there was amazing product market fit in terms of what the Datarails does and the need, for FP&A professionals. We started running some marketing campaigns with barely any marketing people on the team, and still it performed amazingly. So we quickly grew the team. The company grew a lot in the past year. We're doing a lot of fun marketing stuff, also sponsoring this podcast. And yeah, I'm really happy to be here. And as you can understand, from doing an MBA, I actually have some friends in finance, I must admit. So really excited to be here.
Good. We're glad to have you, and we're glad that you have some friends in finance, that we're not all enemies. Christian, would you like?
By the way, even Shruti, that was one of the guests recently on your podcast. It's
Wait,
my
which
friend
guest?
from business school. Shruti.
Shruti Lenka.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, got it. Oh, it's small world. She did go to, I remember saying she went to Duke. That's definitely a small world. Exciting. All right, Christian, why don't you go ahead and give us a little bit more about your background?
Yeah, I'm originally from Germany. That's where I grew up and where I have my accent from. And I started my career there at P&G. It's a large consumer goods company. But I knew eventually I would end up in the States because my wife, my then fiance, is from the States. And so after 4 years, I just said, okay, now is the time, now or never. I quit my job. I came over here, without anything. We drove from San Francisco all the way to New York City through the southern states. Beautiful if you ever get the chance to do that. And I was very fortunate that I was able to start working at Unilever in the FP&A team. Unilever is a large consumer goods company. Maybe you know brands like Breyers, Magnum, in ice cream, Ben and Jerry's, or Dove in the body lotion, shower gels, etc. And I was fortunate that I had the chance to work at several different FP&A roles. And then I also moved into leadership roles. And my last role there was leading the FP&A and the accounting team for the logistics finance department there. And then I also did my MBA. I did it at Stern. And when I talked to people during my MBA, they told me that if you've never worked at a startup before, or especially in tech, you should, because you'll see that decisions are being made a lot faster. And that's definitely something that resonated with me, because at a large multinational company like Unilever, whenever you make a recommendation, you want to, change a process, etc., the local team has to approve, the regional team has to approve, and then they have to convince the global team to make the change, right? So a lot of bureaucracy, long decision-making cycles. And so after my MBA, I was excited to get an offer from Squarespace. It's a website builder company, a late-stage startup, already 1,500 people, and we actually took it live while I was there. It was a fantastic. We took it public while I was there, which was a fantastic opportunity and a fantastic place to be in the FP&A team when we were doing all the, game planning and prepping the CFO for speaking to analysts for the first time. I learned a lot there. And then I moved to Datarails, and Datarails fascinated me because what I enjoyed most about FP&A has always been, helping my business partners make better decisions, through financial analysis, and also process optimization, making their life a bit easier, making sure that not everything you're doing is manual, helping them with Excel and stuff. And when I realized that there's a company that hires, people with FP&A background, but my role at Datarails would be helping other companies get out of their manual processes, I immediately jumped on it. That's what Datarails does. We work with finance teams that are, drowning in spreadsheets, and we help them automate the process and work through that. And around the same time, I also started my online education business on the side. FP&A Bootcamp is the course. And I did that because when I was onboarding, new direct reports on my team, I realized that learning FP&A from scratch is difficult because there's a lot that they don't cover at universities. And at the same time, I realized that I really enjoy teaching. And so it really was a no-brainer to go and try and see if I can build a course where I can teach FP&A, to others through the internet. And that's what I've been doing for over a year now.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for both of you, sharing a little bit more about yourself, just so our audience is aware. In this episode, we're going to talk a fair about marketing. That's why we brought in a marketing person, and how finance and marketing work together. But before we jump into that part of it, I have a few more questions. So I'm curious, Aviv, how did you and Christian first connect? I mean, how did that happen that he ended up at Datarails with you?
So yeah, it's a cool story, but based on what you said, the theme of this podcast is like marketing and finance. So actually, when I started in Datarails, I quickly decided that we don't want to be like yet another B2B company that's like boring and do the regular, boring webinars, white papers, and so on. And I wanted to get in touch, with influencers in the field of FP&A. Apparently, there are influencers in FP&A. Who would have, imagined that? So, I got to speak with you, Paul. I got to also speak with Christian. And actually, in one of my visits, to our New York office, I reached out to Christian. I said, okay, let's have lunch. Let's talk. I noticed, Christian, based on like the great content that he posts regularly, like on LinkedIn, and also the FP&A bootcamp where we started to partner on. And, we met for lunch, had a great discussion. And like during lunch, I said, like, maybe like you should meet the team, learn more about what we do like in our startup. So, very spontaneously, we just went into our office. Christian met, our Sloan, our director of customer success, Jonathan, our director of pre-sales. They hit it off, had a great conversation. From here to there, all of a sudden, Christian joined the company. So luckily we had that lunch.
Great. No, and I can see where that started with the boot camp. Sounds like worked out really well for both of you, and great situation. So I appreciate that answer. And kind of, speaking of boot camp, when you first met, how is that going now for you, Christian? How's kind of the progress been coming on the boot camp?
When I launched it for the first time a bit over a year ago, I really had no expectations, right? I had no idea how many people would be interested in doing that. I had no idea if people would like it, right? But I'm really positively surprised by the response. I've been doing it for a bit over a year, and I just had my 200th student this year. And it's always, what I enjoy about it is it's live over Zoom, so I can see in people's eyes when they get it, right? When the eyes light up and they're like, okay, I get what you mean. I get how I can apply it. And that's just super motivating.
100% with you on that. I love when I'm training somebody, whether it be Excel or the FP&A courses I have, and you can see the light bulb go on and that they've really understood something and that it will make a difference. That's always really rewarding. So that's probably my favorite part of teaching live as well. So thank you for sharing that. So Aviv, this question is for you. I'm curious, what attracted you to, marketing for startups? You've led marketing at several startups. Why startups versus, IBM where you started?
Yeah, I think it's similar to what Christian said also from the finance side. That he said that, like people were telling him try startups. So I worked for IBM for 4 years, and it was nice. I was doing different roles, managing teams. But at the end of the day, when reading like books about this marketing or following, thought leaders in the space, I just felt I'm not doing the same thing because, when you work with a big company, you're doing something very niche, something very specific. Don't see the full perspective. So I decided, maybe the salary isn't going to be as good or like the job protection is going to be as good, but let's go for it. And the last couple of years, last couple of jobs, I've been just working like in small startups. First, I was in a startup that went from round A to round B. Now the same thing here with Datarails, being on this roller coaster of like hyper growth startups that, invest a lot of money in, and like you need to quickly do everything in marketing. Whether it's, building the website, starting, paid media channels, product marketing, working with influencers, doing podcasts, building a brand, calculating, the CAC to LTV, let's talk like finance terms, payback period, like all of a sudden, like you feel, you're much more engaged. You feel like you're making more of an impact as opposed to like if you were at a big company that maybe you can impact like on paper, or let's call it like on Excel. Like it seems like, millions, tens of millions of dollars are moving around based on everything you do, but it's still just an Excel. It's not the same feeling as if you're in a small startup and every sale is like a celebration. Everything that you're able like to figure out and like every process you're able to do better really can make a dent. So I'm super happy now, like at startups and especially here at Datarails.
Thank you for sharing that answer. And I can see where the attraction comes to startups. There's a lot of fun. And I really liked how you mentioned, right, the reward. You can immediately see that impact. You celebrate a sell versus, I saw something on an Excel file this month and it looks like we've done better, right? It's just you get a much, closer to the action, so to speak.
Yeah, I can share that, like in IBM, like we're talking about sales cycles for over a year. So we used to do like huge events like Mobile World Congress in Barcelona. It was fun. But like at the end of the day, like you look at the numbers and, like you're influencing some kind of part of the buyer decision that can take like over a year. And at Datarails, like usually the sales cycles is less than a month, sometimes even just a few weeks. So like being able to see like, okay, I did an action now. In a few weeks, I see the result. That's awesome. That's just fun.
Agree. Having started my own business and seeing the times where you see, something you do actually have a quick result. Very, very satisfying. You know what it is like. 13 different spreadsheets emailed out to 23 different budget holders, multiple iterations, version control, errors, back and forth updates. You never really feel in control of the consolidation and collection process. Yep, I've been there. Stop, breathe. Datarails is the financial planning and analysis platform for Excel users. Datarails takes data from all your company's disparate sources. No organization is too complex, consolidating everything into one place, secured in the cloud. Now all your data finally talking to each other. Everything is automated back into your report in Excel. Cash flow, FX conversion, intercompany transactions, now automated and up to date. Drill down and variance analysis in seconds. Don't replace Excel, embrace Excel. Turn your Excel into a lean, mean FP&A machine. Find out more at www.datarails.com. So I have a question for you. Obviously there's been kind of, a reputation out there between marketing and finance that there's friction at times. It seems that a lot of business leaders, in particular marketing, are hesitant about working closely with finance, particularly around budget season. So I just want to get some of your thoughts. Why do you think that is? Why do you think, kind of marketing and finance sometimes seem to be at odds and a little bit of friction there?
Yeah, let's make it interesting, right? Like this is a podcast being listened to, especially by finance people. So I'll be happy to share like the other side. First of all, like we as marketers, we believe, we know best, and I'm sure finance people, I think they know best as well. So it's very hard to just say like, okay, I can rely on someone else in the C-suite to tell me like how to do my job better. And there is also the challenge, I've been listening to a lot of episodes in the podcast and reading about that. According to also a lot of research that, CFOs and people in the finance department, they want to be business partners, and they want to feel that, like they're really supporting other decision makers in the company, like the CMO in my case, or like, any other like chief product officer, any other like, or sales, any other position. The problem is, and this is like, I'm opening my heart here as like the marketing side, that we're not always sure that like the finance people have our best interests at heart, because sometimes, and this happened to me in a previous startup, the finance person or the CFO figures out something doesn't make sense. He goes to the to the CEO, gets credit on showing, you see, the CMO is spending all this money on this thing and it doesn't make like any sense. Like, where are the results? And then the CEO comes, to me asking, okay, what are you doing here? It doesn't make sense. And I think, first of all, sometimes they make good points, but sometimes I don't think like the CFOs see, the full picture. And I think it's like a misalignment of interest that, at the end of the day, like, it's not that, the finance department reports to marketing or sales or anything like that. It's like, you need to work together for the best thing to do, for the business. But sometimes, everyone has, their own interests at heart, and, they want to show, the CEO that you're smart, that you're able, to figure things out and save money, especially during, times like this. So yeah, it's a friction. So I think my recommendation for finance people listening is like build that honest relationship with, business partners that, they can trust you, and they won't feel that, the first thing you're going to do once you figure out a problem is run to the CEO and say like, look, they don't know what they're doing. Like, let's cut that budget.
Christian, you said, that honest trust relationship. I think you know something about that. Did you give a speech about that at AFP?
Yeah, I talked about trust, gave a speech there, but I want to touch on what Aviv mentioned is because I think he's absolutely right that sometimes incentives can be slightly different, right? Finance, we have to, we're being told, okay, we have to look at the profit. No one else is looking at the profit. Marketing just wants to, so that's what sometimes we're being told, right? Marketing just wants to have as much money as possible so they can do as much as possible, and, but that's not necessarily true. Often the incentive actually aren't misaligned. People just think they are, right? Based on, limited information. And so based on my experience, what I learned as I partnered with marketing very closely for a number of years is you have to earn that trust as a finance business partner. You have to show them that you want to do more than just cutting budgets or following up about month and close topics, right? Because that's sometimes the image we have, because that's what we have to do, right? We can't get around that. That's just part of any finance role. You have to manage the budgets and follow up about correct accruals, etc. But we can do more. The challenge is that finance can only do more when we have enough information early enough. But the challenge is that marketing to share that information with finance makes them vulnerable, right? Because we could go in and say, oh, this new marketing channel there you're trying with TikTok, it really seems like it's not working. The ROI doesn't seem to be there. Let's cut it, right? And that's where we as finance people also need to be able to wear both hats and need to be able to, first of all, understand really what the goals are, because not every marketing asset that's getting put out there has the job of immediately turning a profit, right? A lot of what the marketing team does is more long-term. So it's about understanding really what the goals are of your market business partners. And specifically, the question that I like to ask them specifically is, in an ideal world, what would you like to know about your business to make better decisions? And when would you like to know that? So I don't ask about metrics right away. I just ask them, what do you want to know about the business? What do you want to know earlier so you can make better decisions? And that then usually leads to something, where they talk about, oh, if I only knew, if I only had this data earlier or this analysis. And then you can go in and you can put that together. You can share that with them. And that's how you can show, that you actually want to help them reach their goals rather than just managing budget and cutting costs.
Thank you. I appreciate the answer there. And two things came to mind. One, as you talked about, often cutting budget. As I worked for a company where they were spending so little in one of the businesses I supported for marketing that I had to go to bat to try to get them more. And I never had much success with the CFO in this company, but it was so bad that one of our salespeople came back and said, some people don't even think we're in the market anymore because we were spending so little on marketing. They weren't even aware we were still a product. And so that definitely gave me an appreciation for finding that right balance of, okay, marketing really does need to spend. It works. You can't always attribute it directly, right? Like you may not be, like you said, the TikTok example or different things. You can't always say, this is what resulted in a sale. But that doesn't mean it didn't have an impact. So, talking to that, I really appreciate both the answers about building that trust, talking to each other about what you need to do and making sure that you have that relationship so you don't end up in a situation where they run to the CEO and then someone comes to Aviv's office and is like, wait, why are you doing this? Instead of you knowing up front that they have some concerns and you've been able to discuss it with them first.
Yeah, it's a big challenge because I think especially for finance people, like you want to be able to see everything in Excel. You want to be able to measure everything. And it's not like just always possible. I think like marketing is still a mix of like a science and an art. And it's a matter of also, of trust that, like if for marketers, you need to have like with the CEO or with, the CFO that like maybe you need to allocate an X amount of budget, to first of all, reach your targets in terms of, building a pipeline and revenue. But you always need to have like the other things that you just believe in them, even if it's very hard, to measure.
Yeah, and that's a great point that you're raising there, Aviv, because as a finance person, as an FP&A leader, even you're always trying to make decisions based off of data, right? You're always trying to be as data focused as possible. But it also took me a little while to realize that when it comes to return on marketing investment, that's not always possible. It really is an art and a science. And that's simply, I think there's two reasons, maybe that also helps understand the listeners, why that is the case. The first one is allocation and understanding which part of your marketing mix of all the different activities that you're doing at the same time is delivering which return on investment. So for example, you may be able to measure how many clicks you're getting with your Google ads, for example. But if at the same time you run a Facebook campaign or maybe even a TV ad, then it becomes really difficult to attribute how much each of those activities is actually contributing to your revenues, So that can be really difficult.
Yeah, I know, like the point here, like, that we're talking like in marketing circles here is like we call it sometimes like dark social and so on. It's like, think about it like if you just look at analytics. So the best sources I can share like in marketing that come to the websites are people that come like from Google or organic or direct. That just come to your website or search for the word for us, for example, the brand name like Datarails, come to our website and sign up. So in a way, if you would ask from a finance perspective, what you should do. So what am I supposed to do? Invest more in Google organic or like more in the website? No, like that's not the solution. The question is, why did that person even think about searching for Datarails or for my brand name? And it's not everything you can measure. Like how would you be able to know if, let's say, a few CFOs spoke about Datarails like over dinner and decided, one of them decided to check it out, or maybe they were in some kind of a Slack community, or they heard about it like in a podcast or something like that. Some things are measurable. Let's say like a Facebook ad, like you just click on it, but that's like the bad thing in the incentives, that sometimes it makes you just want to invest in the things that are easily measurable as opposed to the things that might really make an impact, but it's very hard to measure.
Exactly. And it becomes even a bigger issue when you're making decisions about how much to invest into direct response marketing. So that's marketing that where you're immediately looking for a purchase. And then brand investment, which is much more long-term, right? Where you're building your company's brand and hope that then later on that leads to people responding to your direct response marketing. And the challenge is that brand investment is very difficult to measure from a finance point of view, because there is no immediate goal of immediately making a profit from that investment, right? It's more over the long term. It's setting a seed in people's head, and when the next time they're thinking about FP&A process automation, Datarails comes to mind. And what really convinced me that this is more an art than a science is when we did customer interviews, and we asked them, so, okay, now you can tell us which of all these ads that you've seen convinced you to sign up? And they didn't even know. So if they don't even know, there's really not much data there to work with. So that's really where you have to find the balance when you're working in finance.
So, speaking to that, you made a lot of good points. There's obviously an art and a science. How do you recommend finance and marketing get on the same page of how to measure things, right? Because you have to measure performance, regardless of whether you can attribute everything into nice, clean buckets, which obviously you can't. So how do you think about that alignment? Because that's often a friction point. Marketing may be looking at things, one way to say, hey, we think we're getting a good return, and finance may be looking at it a different way and saying, hey, we don't think you're getting a good return. So how do you get on the same page and make sure, you're aligned around those metrics to determine, if campaigns are working, if marketing is giving an ROI that makes sense for the company? What's your thoughts on that, Aviv?
So I would say that despite like everything we said, so we live in a world you want to be able to measure. So you do want to first, like as a CMO, focus on things that are measurable, that, in terms of the CEO, they're asking, okay, I invested X amount of dollars here. How many SQL, sales qualified leads it got? How many meetings? How many opportunities? How many sales? You want to be able to be really good at that. But I think if you're experienced enough and if you are able to deliver the results, you need to have this kind of relationship with your CEO and CFO and saying, I still need, 10%, 20% of the budget. Just let me do things I believe in. It's harder to measure, but let's try doing it. I'll give you one example of how we're trying to measure it. Although, again, it's very difficult because, like I said, the examples before, it's like, if someone talks with another CFO, or let's say like they're in a Slack community or something like that, you can't really measure it in terms of analytics. So what we do on our website, when you sign up on a form, we ask you, how did you hear about us? At the beginning, I actually had it like, it's like a drop-down menu, but we changed it to free text. Because if someone says LinkedIn, sometimes it's even not enough. Like, I want to know why LinkedIn, a LinkedIn ad, maybe a LinkedIn influencer, maybe an employee posted something. It's very hard, to do like big data on it. But it just adds a lot, to the equation. So in addition to the form and the website, we also have our SDRs, when they call someone, the sales development representatives, after they sign up for a demo, we ask them to ask again, how did they hear about us? And sometimes they actually get different responses from what someone filled in a form. So, we constantly try to measure it, although we know it's difficult. Because at the end of the day, we want to know where to invest in. And sometimes we see this, I was in a dinner and CFO spoke about it, or a Slack channel, or I listened to this podcast. And we're constantly trying to do it, but it's very difficult.
Yeah, I would imagine it's very difficult. Christian, any thoughts there from your perspective, from the finance end of things?
Yeah. So attribution on a low level of detail is difficult, but what you can do and what companies do is take marketing expenses at a high level, customer acquisition cost, and then compare it to your lifetime value. That's a common ratio for subscription-based businesses. Your LTV, your lifetime value, should be 3 times as high as your customer acquisition cost if you're an early growing company. But then you can also look at other metrics. So, for example, at Unilever, we also looked at working versus non-working media. So what that means is how much of your media budget is spent actually to Google for launching the ad, or to a TV channel for launching the ad. That's working. And non-working is the money that goes into creating the ad, maybe agencies that you're working with, contractors, etc., and making sure that your non-working expenses aren't over proportional compared to the expenses that actually make your money. That's one. Another metric or non-financial metric we looked at is on time and in full. So when you're giving a brief that you want to, have this story, you want this asset created, what's the percentage of those assets that actually get delivered on time and in full, right, by your agency partner or by your team? Because whenever an asset is delayed, that technically hurts your bottom line. And then a really important metric also is asset wear out. So essentially, when you're spending a lot of time creating an ad, and then when you run it, you want to run it long enough so that until it starts to wear out, until you're saturating the market. And many companies make the mistake of always going after the next shiny thing and creating another campaign and another campaign without making sure that the old assets are actually worn out. You can work with analytics companies, market research companies that tell you whether your asset is worn out or not. And then finally, asset test scores. So at Unilever, we had a rule that we weren't allowed to launch any ad campaign until it got tested, until a peer group reviewed it and we got good test scores.
Thank you for sharing. And I managed FP&A for a marketing company. We marketed the automotive space. So really around service and sales, trying to get people to bring their car back to the dealership. So there's a lot of response rate and different metrics, and we had, multiple different channels. And it was always a lot of things you mentioned here, attribution, different challenges, how often do you refresh things? Because we had a lot of where they could custom build them off catalogs, the different ads they wanted to do, and special, direct market campaigns, we call them on demand. And so I can relate to a lot of what you're saying there, Christian, and it's definitely can be a challenge at times. And Aviv, you look like you were about to say something there a minute ago.
So I agree with everything you two mentioned. And again, it comes back, you're talking, both of you, about also direct response and how to measure stuff. So of course, a lot of the stuff we do, and we have a large user acquisition team, whether at this company or previous companies I was at, constantly A/B test stuff, see what works. But it's always a problem when you limit yourself just to things that are going to generate results now. And in my start marketing class, I actually talk about it that, think about it like dating. Imagine you go on Tinder and all you do is send messages to girls saying do you want to get married? This is a PG version, of course. You want to get married, you want to get married. This is not going to lead you to where you want to be. You need to start gaining the interest. You want to get people to follow you. In the world of B2B, we say that within our target audience, probably 99% of the total addressable market are not ready to buy. Maybe 1% is. We can't only do ads for direct response for that 1% that are going to click on it, ask for a demo, and become a new client. You have to play the long-term game. You have to start conversation, whether it's engaging LinkedIn or podcasts or YouTube stuff, and getting people to follow you, to start liking you, to want to follow the things that you're doing. And maybe eventually you're going to make the sale. It might take 6 months, it might take a year, but then it makes it, when we go back to finance, very hard to measure, because you can't really measure, throughout a year, all those little things that happen, especially if they didn't lead to actually a sign up or any actionable thing that you can measure. But it's just the right thing to do. And it's very hard for both marketers and finance people to grasp that, you just don't have that full control out of it.
Yeah. So speaking to that, I saw a post from someone who was a chief marketing officer on LinkedIn in the finance space. And they're like, reminder, sales impacts the quarter, marketing impacts the future quarters. Kind of that idea that you can't go to marketing a week before the quarter and, hey, we need your help in getting a bunch of sales. It's like, it's a longer, play than that. And it was a really good point. I really liked the way she kind of laid it out, and it speaks to what you were talking about there.
I think it goes back to also what you mentioned, and we spoke about it before about the incentive system. We're talking about finance versus marketing. But actually, here's something both for like CMOs or CFOs, like you're measured on the results of this quarter. Like, so you want to do things that, like the CEO, or like if you're publicly traded, the stockholders are going to be happy now. And so it's very hard sometimes to say, yes, I'm willing to do something that's going to turn in results like maybe 6 months from now or a year, because maybe I'm not going to be here if I don't deliver the results now. But yet again, if you don't do it, so maybe now you'll have a job, and in 6 months, a year, if you didn't really invest in creating like good content and like a reason to follow you, then you're kind of in a tough spot if everything has to be direct response.
Great point. And aligning those incentives is so important. And it's a challenge because often you're worried about the quarter and you're trying to figure out, okay, how do I help bring in some sales this quarter? But it's a long-term play as well. So I think we had a good conversation there. Appreciate that. I want to shift gears just a little bit here and ask you, Aviv, what's it been like, marketing to the FP&A community? Maybe how has that community been different from other industries you've worked in?
Interesting. Yeah. So, actually, in my previous industry, it was very different. I was working at Workiz in the field service management space. So it was like a CRM for locksmith, garage door repair technicians, plumbers. As you can imagine, kind of different than FP&A professionals. I think there's plenty of things that are different. I think for example, in our previous space, we could post things online. And people in different Facebook groups, and we would get dozens of different answers, and people would start debating, and they have less of a sense of what are other people thinking about them, maybe as opposed to finance professionals or professionals in general. So it was fun. Even when we sent marketing emails to people, after COVID, we sent an email asking them how are you doing? Is everything fine? We got heartwarming emails saying yeah, it's been a tough time. People were opening up. And with finance, people are a bit more conservative, you could say, but they look much more they want to see more of the facts. They want to read more. They want to look into more white papers and reviews. They really want to make sure that, you're less of BSing in a way, really straight down the facts, and actually see the product as much as possible. In our ads, we try to show the product as much as we can, and doing really high quality conversations and really delivering, I think, value. That's the main thing we notice. I notice finance professionals are looking for.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm curious, Christian, similar type question for you, but with the boot camp, what have you found trying to market to FP&A professionals? Because I'm sure that's very different than, supporting marketing and support and being in the FP&A role. So what have you found?
Yeah. I mean, going into this, I didn't know much about marketing at all, right? Really, just my background is in FP&A, of course. And in the beginning, it was tough because I was like, okay, I have this course here, but no one knows about it, right? So how can I show people what it's all about? And then how can I, if I put out a link and say, hey, I do this free workshop to, teach you something and introduce the course, why would anyone do that? Why would anyone actually take an hour out of the day and join that? That's how I thought in the beginning. And it took me a while to understand that, it's all about building trust. It's actually very similar to working inside of a business. When I started posting regularly on LinkedIn, I posted almost every day. And I just shared what I know, just, for free without any ask attached to it. Then people started to see that, okay, this guy actually knows, what he's talking about. And they got interested, and they looked me up, and they found my course website, and that's how it all started. And I'm really fortunate that someone gave me that advice early on, that nowadays it's not about spending a lot of money, on ads. It's about showing people, proving to people essentially that they actually know what you're talking about. And from there, I realized that I actually enjoy writing, and I've been doing it ever since.
Great. Thank you for sharing. And I totally agree with you, especially when you are the brand, right? A business of one. It's so important to be able to show you're qualified, that you know what you're talking about, to build that credibility, because they're coming to you for training. And if they don't think you're qualified, right, they're not going to come to you. You've lost any chance of bringing in that customer. So that's a great point there. So appreciate both of you sharing a little bit about the marketing to the FP&A community and how it's different. So speaking of communities, I know you guys, Datarails, recently launched an FP&A community. It's a Slack community. Aviv, can you maybe tell us a little bit about that? What led to launching that?
Yeah, so again, based on what I said before, like we really believe in like the long run, and something we noticed that's missing is in the world of FP&A, there's no like one place that I always try to figure out when I was talking with FP&A people or CFOs of where people can really share ideas about FP&A. So some people like you guys actually post like on LinkedIn, but it's more like a public forum. But there's no place where you can just like share ideas, really have open conversations, really debate maybe between different vendors or between best practices in a closed community where you feel safe. And I have stuff like that, for marketing. So I thought, it's worthwhile like to really open a community just for FP&A. Like, please like Google it, go to FP&A, to search for FP&A community, or go to the Datarails website and you'll be able to join it. And again, the goal is not sales at all. Like we really want to have online conversations. Like it's strictly forbidding to talk about any, trying to sell or market like any specific software. So we already have like a few hundred people like that join, and we're trying to build it more and more. There's a lot of more room, to grow it. There, I'm seeing like some interesting conversations are starting there, and I think it's just the beginning, because it just feels like something that FP&A community just really wants and needs, and just something like was lacking in the industry. So, hopefully it's going to be successful. So we'll see with time.
Great. Like to see that grow. And just if in case anyone didn't, hear that, you can go to the Datarails website or just search FP&A community on Google and you'll find it. It's a Slack community. I know Christian's a member. I'm a member of it myself, and seen some great conversations on there that people have had. So thanks for sharing a little bit about that and creating that for the community. I agree with you. It's something that it was good to have, because we need those opportunities to connect and discuss things. So now we're going to move into a little bit more kind of the personal part of our podcast here. A couple questions we ask all our guests, and we'll start with the first one here, and we'll give this one to you, Christian. Can you maybe tell us about an accomplishment as you look back on your career, something you use in a job interview that you're most proud of?
Yeah. So I was in charge of the team at Unilever that manages the marketing expenses centrally. So it's like a center of excellence where we would, instead of partnering with just one team, we were responsible to managing the forecast and the budget for all of the marketing teams. And when I started that role, I was surprised to see that everything was done in Excel. A budget, I can't quote the exact numbers, but in the hundreds of millions that was managed in Excel was a bit shocking to me, right? And so I started a project where we wanted to replace that process with a proper tool, a proper FP&A tool. Datarails wasn't around back then. It was a while ago. Otherwise, of course, I would have went that way. But it was a different tool. I'm not going to name it. But it was fantastic, and fantastic opportunity for me to lead a project like that, because I was responsible end to end. First, I had to get the budget for it, and the CFO originally wasn't convinced, right? Because it would save the finance team a lot of time. That's how I pitched it initially, and he wasn't really that convinced. And then I talked to other senior leaders and tried to figure out, okay, what does the CFO actually really care about? And I realized that what he cares most about is financial controls. And so I approached him that way. And it's true that when you move out of just vanilla Excel into a proper software, your financial controls are better, because you can't accidentally, upload the wrong version, or, lose a file or get lost in email. And that ended up convincing him. And, we got the budget. But then I thought the job was more or less, done. We found a vendor, we started the implementation process. But I realized that the job wasn't even close to done because now I had to convince the marketing team. And there were a few people there actually a number of people at the beginning, who were happy with the way things were managed before. They understood their Excel files, they knew what they had to do. And they didn't want to switch to a different tool. They didn't want to having to learn that, they didn't want to go through the process. And so at the beginning,
those marketers, that's what I was thinking too.
At the beginning, I was just like emphasizing all the benefits, how it would save them time, etc. And it didn't really ring true for them. And then I had the idea, okay, maybe let's grab two of the marketing managers who were most against the tool, who had the most criticism. And we actually brought them into the project team. So they were joining the meetings with us. They were meeting with the vendor, and the vendor was very receptive to changes that we were proposing to the tool, etc. And then they, once they became part of the experience, they completely changed, because they realized that their voice was heard. They realized that we're actually trying to make the life easier, not just the life of finance. And then they became our best ambassadors. They talked to the rest of their team. And in the end, people were fully on board, and it was a big success. So it was a really cool story.
Thank you for sharing that, Christian. And I think there's a lesson in there in influencing, right? Bring in your detractors and make them part of the project. And it's amazing how quickly you can get buy-in and things go smooth, because there's usually always one or two voices that are driving a lot of decisions. And if you get the right people along, it makes things become a lot easier. So thank you for sharing that. There's a lot to learn there about partnering and influencing in that answer. So this next question is for you, Aviv. And this is one we like to ask everybody. Can you describe a time you experienced a failure at work, something where it just didn't go as planned? Maybe a marketing campaign that was a disaster or project implementation. And then what did you learn from the experience? Like, what was the takeaway of going through that experience?
Yeah, so I think my answer can be maybe even a mix of this question and also the previous question you asked. So in my previous role, when I started, my success was within 6 months, I was able to reduce the cost of acquisition to a third of what it was before. So that should have been my success story if that was the question you asked. The problem was that we were still working with lower budgets. And what happened is, we started to increase the budgets more and more and more, the hyper growth mentality of 2020. And I think the thing that we failed on is that we didn't have a strong enough product market fit. And, the more we increase the budget, it's like drugs in a way. You become addicted because every time you don't hit your target, you want to put more money in and more money in. And at some point, it just didn't make any more sense. And I think the problem was we were still trying to get into too many verticals at once, with the same solution. In retrospect, I think we should have focused more on a specific vertical or waited until the product would be a better fit for this vertical or another. And we were just trying to hammer it too hard in, and it broke. We had to take at some point a step back. And I think this mentality of spray and pray may have been maybe something that worked to some degree in 2020 or even 2021. But I think especially now, when we're at the end of 2022 with our recession, everything, inflation and everything that's happening, I think all companies need to be smart. I think that's something I learned from, and something we're doing also now, in Datarails. We're understanding that sometimes it's the smart thing to do is reduce your focus on crazy growth in terms of growing responsibly. Like Christian said, the CAC LTV, and looking at the payback period. You want to do it the right way. That's something I learned, from that failure in my previous company.
It's funny when you said the pray and spray. It reminded me I worked at a large bank, and the conversation we had one time is at the bank we would point and point and point, never shoot, right? Some people just pray and spray. And then we were talking about one of the main competitors. Like their philosophy was just point and shoot. It's like, kind of go for everything. It's like we would never make a decision. They were always jumping from thing to thing. And the reality is the answer is, somewhere in the middle. There's times small bets, you want to move quickly, but there's value, like you said, in that discipline and not getting caught up in having it be a drug, as you mentioned, right? Just keep spending and spending and spending.
Yeah, I think it's like the incentive system, like, again, like we discussed in the past, like for marketing, it's like you want to hit your revenue target. Like, especially, again, 2021 and times like that, you can't tell like your CEO, you know what, like, let's reduce like our targets. And the same thing, I think, for the CFO or the CEO, you can't go to the board and say, you know what, we promised you X for growth. You know what, let's do it more responsibly. Let's do it X2 and take it down a notch because the product isn't ready. And I think you always have to look at the incentives of specific individuals to understand, decision making.
I fully agree with you. A lot of great points there. So this next question is one we like to ask that's a personal question. And so it's, what's something unique about you that, we wouldn't find online that you can share with our audience? And Aviv, we'll start with you first.
So I don't think finance is boring. I know like a lot of, finance people might think that like marketers or salespeople would think it's boring, but I actually like that part of the job. I like creating budgets and working on forecasting and working, with the CFO and planning, for the next year, all this kind of budget plans and doing different scenarios. I do enjoy that part. So, if you use like Datarails for FP&A, like syncs. So I actually use a tool called like Funnel.io that syncs to your Excel and updates it automatically with everything that's happening within HubSpot and Salesforce and all your numbers in. And like I mentioned, I also did my MBA. I have friends in finance. I must admit, no one's perfect. But I enjoy finance.
So that means, Christian, he actually kind of likes us people. I mean, that's a good thing, I guess. We got to have a few marketing friends. So, Christian, how about you? What's something you can share with our audience?
Yeah, so what a lot of people don't know is that I have a background in martial arts. So when I was a teenager, I did a lot of judo. I'm a brown belt in judo, and I also taught it to kids as a teenager, as a judo coach. And it actually ended up being a big factor in deciding to go down my path, to study business and, go into leadership path. Because, we had this one kid in our class, in our judo class, that was very rude. He would never do what we asked him to do. He would bother the other kids instead, and we tried everything, my partner and I. We tried, to make him do push-ups and let him run around so he can get a bit more rid of his energy, so he follows along more. None of that worked. We talked to him, we talked to his parents, none of that worked. And then I thought, okay, let's try something different. And I went to him and I said, hey, we have a lot of kids here today. Do you maybe want to help us a bit and help us, as a coach? And we told him, hey, maybe you can go over to those kids, and you've done this for a while. You know how to do this technique. Maybe you can explain it to them. And he lit up and he went there and he explained it to those kids. And he was so excited about getting his job, then seeing that we trust him do that I've never seen something like that even ever since. He changed overnight. And from then on, he was one of the best behaved kids that we had, because he really felt empowered and he felt that we believe in him. And it really opened my eyes to how much of an impact a good leader or a good mentor, can have. And that definitely played a big role in my decision to study business and, working towards a management role.
Thank you for sharing that. Sounds like a very rewarding experience, and a reminder that there's different ways you can reach people and bring them to accomplish great things when sometimes you don't think you can, right? Went from being the problem child, so to speak, to being a great asset for you. I really appreciate that answer. So this next question is one of the favorites we have. We ask everybody this. We'll start with Aviv, because I'm pretty sure I know what Christian's answer is going to be. Aviv, what's your favorite Excel function, feature? What's your favorite thing about Excel?
Summing up numbers is amazing. No, actually, like everyone else I saw is doing VLOOKUP. I'm listening to the episodes. I'm saying probably you finance people think like, all I know is like sum and average. No, but actually also like VLOOKUP, I think it's great. Actually, from listening to the previous episodes, I think I need to ask Christian to teach me about index match. But one step at a time. And based on what I mentioned before, I also love the different tools that do integration, not like Datarails, but like I mentioned before, like Funnel.io or other ones. Everything that can really automate what happens within Excel. I think that's really what makes Excel even better.
Agree. There's a lot of great integrations out there. And, Christian, first, last year, what do you think of VLOOKUP?
I'm not a fan of VLOOKUP. So Paul and I had a big discussion about that and on LinkedIn, also about XLOOKUP. And I'm index match, through and through. And I could probably talk for half an hour about how great index match is.
I'll give you 30 seconds.
No, basically index match, it's a dynamic cell reference, right? So if something changes in your source data, your index match won't show you a wrong number, but VLOOKUP does. And that's not even the worst thing about VLOOKUP. The worst thing about VLOOKUP is it shows you a different number than what you're looking for if your source data changes in the wrong way. And it doesn't even give you an error message. No, it just shows you a wrong number. So you may report a wrong result without even knowing it. And index match doesn't have these flaws. Index match just shows you a nice NA, error when it can't do something, and that's why I'm a big index match fan.
And this is the fun of asking this question. Everybody has a different opinion. Yeah, I like XLOOKUP myself and Power Query, but my view is use whichever one works for you. Just understand the pros and cons. If you know what you're doing and you're making sure you're checking your data and it's working, I'm all good with it. But everybody has different views there. Well, first, I just want to thank both of you for being on the show today. We've really enjoyed the time here. I know I've enjoyed talking about marketing. I've learned some new things. I haven't spent a ton of time supporting marketing, so I always enjoy these conversations. And just the last question I'm going to have for each of you, if someone wants to get in contact with you, maybe learn more, what's the best way to connect? And we'll start with you, Aviv, on this question. What would be the best way to connect with you?
Yeah, I guess LinkedIn. LinkedIn's the best, to connect with new people, professional networks. So yeah, reach out to me, Aviv Canaani. Of course, the Datarails. You'll easily find me. I'm probably the only one with that name on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I wouldn't imagine there's a lot, especially Datarails. So thank you, Aviv Canaani. And Christian, how about you? What's the best way for someone to get in touch with you?
Same here. I'm on LinkedIn every day, so feel free to reach out there. Name is Christian Wattig, also unique on LinkedIn, fortunately. So yeah, feel free to connect and happy to chat.
Thank you for that, Christian. Thank you again, Aviv and Christian, for being on the show, and hope you guys come back again sometime. We really enjoyed the conversation, so thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you very much, Paul. I really appreciate it.